The Adelaide Crows versus the Port Adelaide Power, the South Australian rivalry known to football fans as the Showdown. Although the first contest was only played in 1997, Showdowns have developed a reputation for being fierce, loud and intensely competitive. So much so that former Adelaide coach Malcolm Blight has proclaimed it the greatest rivalry in Australian football. As the teams prepare to face off for the 50th time, the Power hold the slimmest of advantages. The honours nearly perfectly split 25-24. In that inaugural 97 game, it was newcomers Port who snatched an unexpected 11-point win. But even before a ball had been bounced, many supporters in the stand had already vowed to hate everything about their opposition. In just 24 years, this rivalry has forged an edge that places it alongside others that have had over a century to develop. In order to understand how we got here, we need to journey back to 1981, a year when the Port Adelaide Magpies ruled South Australia, the Victorian Football League remained within its state borders, and the idea of a national competition was just a dream in the heads of VFL executives. Here begins the true first showdown, a battle played not on the green expanse of Football Park, but rather in the boardrooms and courthouses of South Australia. Meow. The story begins as the South Australian National Football League, wary of the growing prominence of the VFL and the ability of its richer clubs to poach Australia's best footballing talent, approached the Victorian football executives with the idea of admitting a composite South Australian team to the league for the 1982 season, a proposal the VFL rejected, instead concentrating on the upcoming relocation of South Melbourne to Sydney, although negotiations would continue throughout the next decade. As financial hardship began to dog Australian rules football countrywide, the SANFL decided that clubs were to distribute gate takings amongst the league in order to support struggling clubs and protect the competition. This decision was not received well by powerhouses and bitter rivals Norwood and Port Adelaide, who were the main clubs to forgo ticket revenue. Meanwhile, across the border, the VFL sold $4 million expansion licences to teams in Perth and Brisbane in an effort to prop up its own struggling clubs. The SANFL, however, were adamant they would not pay any entry fee to join the expanding league, and as the 1987 season began, South Australia became the only mainland state without a team in the VFL. As the AFL era approached, fresh CEO Ross Oakley changed the VFL's tactics in 1988. We were changing the league's name to AFL, and we could not go without a team from Adelaide. We wanted a composite side first up, but we were knocked back by the SANFL, so we approached the two strongest supported clubs, Norwood and Port Adelaide. Oakley wasn't to get his wish, however, and 1990 saw the launch of the Australian Football League without a South Australian side. The SANFL had maintained its stubborn approach, and on May 14th of that year, its member clubs voted that no South Australian team would enter the AFL until 1993. Port Adelaide, however, fresh off the success of attracting a home crowd of almost 30,000 people to a pre-season match against Geelong, elected to secretly continue negotiations with the AFL. As the deal edged closer, journalist Mike Sheehan let the Magpie out of the bag. The Australian Football League and rebel South Australian football officials are at an advanced stage in secret negotiations that would see an Adelaide-based 15th team enter the national competition next year. On July 30, the news was confirmed. Port Adelaide had signed an agreement with the AFL. Their reaction was fierce and immediate. SANFL President Max Bashir called it an act of betrayal, while Glenelg headed to the Supreme Court of South Australia to file an injunction to prevent further negotiations between Port and the league. As West Torrens, South and Sturt all jumped to the support of Glenelg, Norwood were not to be left out, acting separately to obtain a writ against Port's board of directors. The SANFL's own lawyers then began suing Port Adelaide administrators and volunteers, requiring the AFL to step in and seek guarantees of protection as Port were unable to withstand the assault on multiple fronts. It essentially ended any chance Port had of refining their pitch and securing enough votes from the current AFL clubs to greenlight their entry to the league. In the chaos, the SANFL was shaken from its complacency, and a rival bid was rapidly prepared to beat Port Adelaide's. The idea of a composite Adelaide Football Club had failed to get off the ground in '82, but now, 8 years later, the plan was revived. At a meeting in Melbourne, the SANFL sweetened the deal by abandoning their previous stance on paying a licence fee, offering the AFL $1 million up front with an additional $3 million to follow in instalments if they accepted a composite South Australian side. That was the key to the whole deal, the winning hand. Everything else followed from the moment Max put that $1 million on the table. Then SANFL CEO Lee Wicker later reflected. On September 20, less than 2 months after Port Adelaide announced their plans to join the AFL, the league's 14 existing clubs voted 13-1 to accept the SANFL's offer, Richmond, the lone club, deciding to honour the earlier commitment made to Port Adelaide. The Adelaide Football Club would be the league's 15th team. To the defeated Port Adelaide, this was seen as their rivals being petty or jealous, conspiring to steal the AFL licence they felt they rightly deserved, as South Australia's most successful club. To the rest of South Australian football, Port's secret negotiations were seen not only as a betrayal, but as emblematic of the club's perceived arrogance. As journalist Michelangelo Rucci put it, they are South Australia's club of extremes, the state's oldest, most successful, most loved, and most despised club. For the SANFL though, the job was far from over. They had just 6 months to prepare for the new club's first ever competitive game. A board was established, players were selected, and a jumper of green, blue and white was designed for a team that would be known as the Adelaide Sharks. However, these were soon dismissed in favour of the state's colours of red, navy and gold, in a more traditionally football design. While the crow was deemed to be a more appropriate mascot to represent the pride of South Australia. On the 22nd of March 1991, the Crows defeated eventual premiers Hawthorn by 86 points at Football Park in their first ever competitive match. The next day, Port Adelaide defeated West Adelaide by 24 points in the SANFL, after the competition had decided not to follow through on threats to exclude the Magpies from the season, as punishment for their attempted breakaway. The Crows would go on to have a solid first year, winning 10 of their 22 games and finishing a respectable 9th. Then, after Port claimed another SANFL premiership in 1992, the Crows won through to their first ever final series in 93. As the 90s dragged on, the AFL continued their push for expansion, with second teams in South Australia and WA higher on the agenda. This time Port was not to be denied, defeating merger bids from Woodville West Torrens and Norwood Sturt to gain an AFL licence. The bad blood seemed to have subsided as Wicker welcomed the announcement. The tension and anger of 1990 is gone. It has been replaced by a sense of relief, particularly now that we've signed an end to this saga, and a sense of excitement for what is ahead, and we're united again. However, as Fremantle docked ahead of them, Port were made to wait until 1997 to play on the national stage, when the merging of Fitzroy and Brisbane opened up a spot in the league. The Port Adelaide Magpies finished the 1996 season as SANFL premiers, then in accordance with their AFL agreement, shed the Magpie nickname and their black and white stripes to become the Port Adelaide Power. Their first matchup with the Crows would take place in round 4, and the present-day PAFC website suggests that it's not all rainbows and sunshine for Port fans. It was 7 years of waiting to confront the team that took Port Adelaide's place in 1991. The Power won that day, but it was the Crows who would soon silence the bragging of their new rivals. They won Showdown 2 when the teams met later in the year, and if that wasn't enough, 97 and 98 would go on to be the greatest in Adelaide's short history, defeating St Kilda and North Melbourne to claim back-to-back underdog grand finals. Both teams would leave their marks on the National League as the 21st century began, Port claiming their first AFL premiership in 2004, and Adelaide making back-to-back prelims in 05 and 06. With both teams being contenders, showdowns became about more than just state pride, and the two teams met for the first, and so far only time in a finals game in the 2005 semi-final, a match marketed as the ultimate showdown. The Crows ruined the Power's chances of going back-to-back, winning by 83 points in front of 50,000 at Football Park. And so our eyes turn back towards 2021, and the 50th meeting of the sides, Port Adelaide fighting for a top 4 spot and another chance at equalling the Crows' premiership tally. Adelaide are at the opposite end of the ladder, with the first promising signs of a rebuild beginning to shine through. If one thing is for sure, it's that no matter where the two sides are placed on the ladder, the contest will always be fierce. Jared Waitley perhaps best captures the mood of the rivalry between two clubs with histories rooted in vastly different eras of the game. The clubs have that sporting notion that Port don't want to be like Adelaide, and Adelaide don't want to be like Port. And that is the essence of the showdown.